Francis, can we turn to you now?
Yes, I think this is an absolutely excellent report. Has great statistics, great analysis and great arguments. And I actually think it pushes the political frontier as far as you can go if you're working within the context of United Nations. And I've worked in reports and I think it's a brave report, very clearly brave about developed countries and what they're doing, saying things that a lot of people wouldn't say. It's interesting, and I think perhaps the most startling conclusion is the big progress that has been made in social protection, particularly in middle-income countries, and particularly in China, which is really impressive. But there are some major problems, and I just want to say a little bit about the major problems. I think the major problems are, first of all, that the informal sector is not covered, mostly. I'm not entirely, because the universal benefits do cover people in the informal sector. But the informal sector covers, as we all know, huge proportions of people, especially in poor countries, and they are very much undercovered. A second issue is the deteriorating position in advanced countries and in some developing countries, but I'm not so concerned about them because there has been progress, as Francesca said, and even though there's been some pullback, it's still big progress compared with the past. The third issue, which really hasn't been mentioned, and I think is going to become more and more important, is the issue of non-citizens everywhere, and the issue of immigrants and non-citizens, and they lack claims. And I think this is an area that we really should be addressing and worrying about. Even if one had universal citizenship rights, what happens to the non-citizens? Let me say a bit more about the advanced countries. Now, we know that the austerity agenda has been very, very damaging to social protection in advanced countries. And it's not just orthodox austerity. It's the way the austerity has been interpreted to really attack the state. So it's an agenda. It's a political agenda. It's not just economics. I think the economics is wrong, but even if the economics were right, we didn't need to do it in this way. So it's been causing really major problems. And for that, we have to look at the underlying politics. I agree with Sam. Why is it happening? And I think you find that support for universal benefits comes when you have a very homogeneous population, which is homogeneous in occupation and homogeneous in ethnicity and so on. And increasingly in developed countries, we have non-homogeneous populations. We have skilled and unskilled workers. We don't have a mass of workers who identify as such. And of course we have many ethnicities, and one way of mobilizing people is against each other, as we see all the time today. So we lack that basis which formed the basis of the welfare state, and I think that is a very depressing conclusion, because I think it's a reality that we have to confront and see what we can do and how we can make political alliances, if we can, to get that basis back at all. So that's sort of a depressing story about advanced countries, which lies underneath, I think, these pullbacks. Turning to the informal sector. Now, the informal sector is least well covered, and it's real challenge, I think, for social protection, because that's where the poor are. And it's interesting. To me, I think it's quite possible that the advances in social protection have actually reduced equality rather than increased it, in some respects. Not the cash transfers, but, for example, all those things that go to the formal sector actually make increase inequality. That's not necessarily a reason for not having them, but it's something I think we should be more aware of. And I would like to see in future reports more distributional data about who is benefiting. And actually, Isabel, I apologise if I say things which are in the report, because it's such a rich and big report that it may well be there and I hadn't noticed it, so I apologise if that's the case. So what can we do about the informal sector? I think it's a really interesting and challenging question. Clearly, universal benefits are one thing we can do, and that's absolutely with the universalism of the report. And I'm also with the idea that narrow targeting is very damaging for the reasons Francesca mentioned. That, well, one reason she mentions that you lose the political support for the benefits and you fail to cover a lot of people who need it. But even within the targeted group, you miss out a whole lot of people, because the target, it may be very good about stopping people who shouldn't get it getting the benefits, but it's pretty bad usually about making sure that everybody who should get the benefits gets them. And a long time ago, I did some work with Andrea Cornier looking at that, and we found huge losses in terms of coverage once you move from a more universal approach to a targeted approach. Now, there are particular types of support that can have large effects on the informal sector, and there are sort of quirky things like widows' pensions. There's been some very interesting work by Jean Drez about how widows' pensions in India would make a huge difference to a lot of people, and would obviously not that costly because there are not so many widows. Even old age pensions, even if you don't do anything else, old age pensions in Africa have been shown to have helped the whole family, because people are living in extended families, so it's not just the immediate pensioner, but the whole family. Then there are employment schemes, and the report mentions the Indian universal employment scheme, which is a fantastic thing, which I think should be tried out many places elsewhere, because it is a scheme which guarantees 100 days' work a year to each household at a reasonable minimum wage. And so it's sort of self-targeted, because no one who's above that wage is going to go forth for that work. On the other hand, it can have, if properly administered, and in some states it's working extremely well, can have a huge effect. There are community schemes which are sort of dismissed in the report, and I'm not quite sure why. Maybe there's some experience with them, but certainly I suppose you could argue that in Britain in the 18th century that is exactly what we had, and it was quite effective. Parishes supported everybody, had to support everybody in the locality. And I think maybe one could do more on that. And then even contributory schemes, specially designed for informal sector and low sector workers, have been shown to be very effective. People save a lot. And the Self-Employed Workers Association in India and Grameen Bank and so on and so forth. There are huge numbers of cases. So I think that there's room in future reports for a really imaginative approach to the problems of the informal sector and how we can get benefits to them, which may be different from some of the formal sector ones. Obviously, again, coming now to the future, the second big challenge is what we can do about avoiding the dismantling of the welfare state in those countries that have got one. A third one, the problem of non-citizens that I mentioned. Fourthly, that we should have more measurements of inequality in terms of benefits in cash and kind. And Francesca said we should also be looking at the taxes at the same time as the benefits. Of course, taxes are not necessarily linked one-for-one to the benefits. So I think we always need to look at the distribution of the tax system as a whole. But most of the evidence suggests that if you increase taxes and expenditure, you have a progressive effect. Because taxes are broadly in line with your income in most countries, one way or another, however, sometimes a little bit progressive. Rarely really regressive. And then looking at the benefits tend to be progressive. So let me conclude, and I want to repeat what an excellent report it is. I want to congratulate Isabel, whose hand I can see in every page. So I feel it's a personal achievement, though. I mean, she can say I'm wrong, but I don't think so. Mm-hmm. And I think it's fantastic.
It's a team effort.
It's a team effort, but I think you've made a fantastic difference since you've gone to the ILO, and I really congratulate you.